Welcome to everybody joining in. We're just allowing people to trickle in and we'll get started in a few minutes. All right, welcome everyone to the Keys of Public Radio Restoring the Vote panel, where we'll be discussing the current climate of voter suppression and how we can keep and restore the power that is our vote. I'm your co-host and KeySIS special correspondent, Danielle Harvey, along with Alejandra and Zena. Thank you to our special guests for joining us today. We'll begin with general questions, but first, if you will, please explain to our audience who you are, the work you do related to fighting voter suppression, and what your take is on the latest voting laws in Georgia and Texas. Ms. Marks, would you like to start?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Yes, I'm Marilyn Marks. I'm the Executive Director of Coalition for Good Governance. We're a small 501c3 and a nonpartisan organization. I'm based in Charlotte, North Carolina, but since 2017, we have done the majority of our work in Georgia, very much focused on Georgia. And in fact, this past year in the session, we worked with Representative Shea Roberts, who was on your panel as well. And we really worked toward helping her try to bring some bipartisan election legislation around election transparency and election security. Sad to say that we'll have to try again next year. And so we're really interested in learning about exactly what is going on in Texas, because we fear that it might mirror too much what happened in Georgia.
Yes, excited to touch on that. Ms. Larkin, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Barbara Larkin, and I am the VP of Voter Services for the League of Women Voters of Dallas. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that's actually structured sort of like the government. There's a US, and they mainly work on US advocacy and empowering voters and defending democracy at the federal level. And then there's a League of Women Voters, the state. And our state right now is working on trying to fight off these bills that are in the Texas legislature right now. And their website has a whole take action section. So we're trying to get people all over Texas to go there and make their voices heard. And I'm actually the League of Women Voters of Dallas. So we're down here sort of dealing with the consequences of the fact that we already have voting bills in Texas that are very difficult and a lot of obstacles. And so we spend most of our time educating voters and trying to get people to understand how to get through the obstacles that we already have. And meanwhile, right now we're looking at this whole new array, which is a whole new round of obstacles that are coming our way. The current obstacles, in my mind, impact young people and people that move a lot and people that are poor and disabled people. And now we've got a whole new crop that's going to be more targeted urban, shift workers. It's got a whole new additional crop of people that I think are going to find it difficult to vote. So we're working on it. We're trying.
Wow, thank you for joining us. Ms. Roberts, would you like to go?
Sure. I'm Representative Shea Roberts, and I was recently elected in 2020 to the State House, District 52, which is North Atlanta and Sandy Springs here in Georgia. I was one of only 3 seats to flip in the State House this year. And it took 3 years. I ran in 2018, got very close. And actually, election issues are one of the big reasons I came back after the 2018 mess in the Stacey Abrams election. That's where I met Marilyn. I spent a lot of time down at the State House watching our new voting machines bill, where we brought in the new voting machines. I've been at almost every state election board meeting, every Fulton County election board meeting, just really learning the election code and the way things work. And so I was thrilled to finally win this session. And all I wanted to do was get assigned to the Government Affairs Committee, and I did. And then the Speaker of the House decided to set up a special committee on election integrity, our Republican Speaker of the House. And so I didn't get to be on that committee, but I spent tireless hours with Marilyn and others just trying to keep up with the speed with which it grew from a 2-page bill to a 90-page omnibus bill. And it's atrocious. We actually had pretty good access to the ballot box in the last election. And so they have dramatically changed that with this new bill. And so I'm happy to be here today to answer questions about what's going on in Georgia. And I think education is definitely going to be the key going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations on that. Now, last but not least, Mr. Gutierrez. I hope I said that correctly.
You did, yeah, thanks. So Anthony Gutierrez, I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause Texas. I guess I and Barbara here are mostly here to really confirm the fears and highlight just how bad things are in Texas with respect to voting rights. So if you're not familiar with Common Cause, we work on a pretty broad range of democracy reform issues. So redistricting reform, like trying to stop gerrymandering, campaign finance, ethics. But for me here in Texas, we for sure spend the vast majority of our time on voting rights. And most of that is trying to stop really, really terrible voter suppression bills. And then where we can, trying to pass some reforms that usually have no chance in our legislature, but we're hoping we can sneak some by this time. And I can hopefully talk about a little bit of both of those.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for joining us. Allie, would you like to get us started with our first round of questions?
Yeah. So basically, we're going to start with just general questions that anyone in the panel can answer. And our first question regards to Senate Bill 202, which recently got passed in Georgia. And it's a law we're very interested in. And for whether you work in Georgia or you've heard about this law, Senate Bill 202, what would you consider the most egregious parts of this bill?
The most dangerous provisions are the county takeover provisions, in my opinion. And unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily have to do with the way we normally think of suppressing the vote, but I think it's an assault on our democracy. And essentially what they've said is that the state election board has the authority to appoint one person, and our state election board is very partisan, to take over for an entire county election board. And that would include how many machines are going to be in the precincts, how they adjudicate absentee ballots, whether Sunday voting is voluntary or it's not mandatory, it's optional. So in Fulton County, in my county, we have lots of folks that go to Souls to the polls. They could decide not to have Sunday voting. And then the scariest thing is, I mean, they're going to determine whether or not to certify the votes. And you all know what happened in Georgia and other around the country. People trying to get them not to certify the vote. And so in my opinion, this law has essentially legalized the coup that failed in January, and it's very concerning. The other things we can educate around, they're horrible, they're awful, but that to me is the most egregious. And I'll let Marilyn.
I just have to echo that. When we talk about our concerns about the bill, this takeover provision is really first, second, and third. It's so important, but it hasn't gotten much press. On election night, not election night, excuse me, the night that the bill was signed, for the first time, it really began to hit the national press. You can look up a clip on Rachel Maddow, and she went into some detailed explanation of just how scary this is, that as Representative Roberts says, the state election board can reach down on a whim, really, without much due process at all, without any due process, quite frankly, reach down and decide that they want to take over a county election board. We already know which counties are going to be targeted. The metro Atlanta counties are exactly the ones that will be targeted, and they can control that county, as Representative Roberts said, with one person. The problem becomes not only what was a public process where we had Democrats, Republicans, and a 5-person board, making up a 5-person board, doing all of the work in public, figuring out where the polling places were going to be, equipping the polling places, certifying the election, counting the provisional ballots. All that will now be done in the dark for any county they take over by one person without much public oversight at all. And it will be too late when the public can actually get in and learn much about the election. But worse, once that appointee is in the place of a bipartisan election board, they've created a virtual impossibility to ever get it back. That czar stays in place, and it would be very difficult to have it only be a temporary slot. So it is one of the things that we are the most concerned about. And it really needs to be challenged. And the national press needs to begin to understand just how dangerous. There are other things that are really egregious and dangerous, including people don't understand yet that as they have removed the signature verification for absentee ballots and put on instead very sensitive private information, your driver's license number and full date of birth, what they've done is they've created a lot of opportunity for identity theft. Not only that, Georgia has never had a problem with mail ballot fraud. They're about to, because they're creating a situation where anybody can turn in numbers without really having to verify who they are. And we really fear an escalation from kind of zero fraud to a lot of fraud. Lots of other provisions scare us, but I know that we could spend the next 3 hours doing that, and you don't have 3 hours to talk about SB 202. But thank you for your question.
Thank you. That's great. It's a little scary, but Danielle, would you like to take over with the next question?
Yeah, so misinformation is more rampant now than ever before with social media. So with that, how can we deal with misinformation around these laws?
That is really a good one, because I would say that even in Georgia right now, the press hasn't really gotten it right, because it's so complex. And we are learning that the election directors in the 159 counties really don't yet understand the bill. So it's very easy for those who would do harm by misinforming to be able to do harm, because there's so few people who understand. And, you know, about all I can come up with is just question, and don't accept the first answer that you get, and remind other people to do the same, particularly on social media. Ask for sources, check for yourself. I hope Representative Roberts has a better answer than I do on what in Georgia we can do to combat so much misinformation.
Well, I know that most of the Democratic organizations are trying to unify their messaging to make sure that we're, giving out the same facts and interpretations. But really, what Marilyn said is the problem is that the Secretary of State, he did his job, but a lot of folks have now held him up because he stood up to Trump. And the problem is now he is one of the big sources of misinformation and minimizing the impact of what this law is going to do. And people have come to trust him, even Democrats, because he did his job. And so that is very dangerous. And we're having to kind of undo that. So it's just going to take time over the next, few months for people to really start to digest this. But I can tell you that I don't believe most of the legislators in the House actually understood the bill, because it came through so fast and so furious. I'm even aware of Republicans that didn't realize I think they thought they could take over the supervisor or they could take over basically the election supervisor, because superintendent in Georgia is defined as the election board, basically. And they did not realize they were replacing 5 people with 1 person. So that's really disconcerting. So some of our efforts are also going to be in seeing if we can't work across the aisle to at least get some things cleaned up. I don't think they're going to undo everything for sure. But we're just going to keep trying and see if we can't get some amendments before 2022. We'll see.
Okay, so before we move on to the next question, did any other panelists like to chime in before we move on?
I do. Is that okay if I do?
Sure.
Yeah, so in Texas, we definitely have an issue that the media doesn't seem to understand the difference between real election, what I view as real election integrity, which are the real processes that are in place in the process. I just worked at the polls on Saturday because we had big city council elections all over Texas. And so, you know, those of us that have worked at the polls, we feel like that, you know, during that period of time that there has been both our integrity called into place, but also the process called into place. People are questioning whether it's valid, whether it works. And all the pieces of the puzzle that actually do create election integrity are really different than the pieces of the puzzle that actually improve voter access. Voter access is a totally different thing. So, you know, taking the hours and making them shorter, that doesn't really have anything to do with how you prevent someone from voting twice. And we're sending letters in, and we're still not quite getting through, I think, the message that what involves election integrity is how you prevent a person from voting twice. And voter access is a completely different topic, because you want people to be able to come and vote. And we need to be able to separate those two in the airspace.
Thank you.
If I can just pop in real quick, just one last point. I think one of the things we do as part of an election protection program is specifically working on misinformation, disinformation during elections mostly. But we're finding it's some of the stuff we learned during the election is working now, which one of them just really focuses on, what you were asking was about misinformation on social platforms. And the platforms are really understanding that they've got a big problem, that there is just so much misinformation coming from so many places. And I think that they're making somewhat of an effort. I think Twitter's the one that we've seen where if you're really able to organize people and just flag a tweet as like, this is just an absolute lie, this is not correct, whether it's about voting procedures or about like, they're just lying about what's in this bill, like you have a pretty decent shot sometimes of getting stuff taken down or getting somebody's account suspended for a little bit. So yeah, there's at least one functional thing that you can attempt to do that may have some success if the lie is blatant enough and you get enough people to flag it.
To follow up on that a bit, and also Ms. Larkin's point about how we need more voter access, are there specific websites that you can think of that people should be able to go to for content or information that is usually accurate, or mostly non-biased?
Definitely the League of Women Voters. We have a lot of websites. We have 4 websites. So we have a national website. We have in the LWV US, in our case, LWV Texas. There's also LWV Georgia, but then there's also the local leagues have websites. And there's Vote 411, which is a national website where the league asks candidates questions, so you can get unbiased information about people that are running and their positions on issues. But that's an issue-based thing. For example, our Dallas League website is all about voting. I also usually, for example, county websites often are good. The county website of Dallas, which is called dallascounty.votes.org, tells you a lot you need to know about voting. And I always encourage people to go to your county website to find out the real rules so that you can navigate the process.
If I can, I would like to say to Barbara that of all of the analysis that we have seen in Georgia of SB 202, League of Women Voters had the most accurate, most complete, and by far the best quality of any that we have seen. So congratulations to your colleagues on that. And I hope it's on your website for others to go reference now that you've mentioned it.
Good, thank you.
All right, for the next question, it is in her State of the Union, Stacey Abrams characterized the Republican efforts to restrict voting as Jim Crow in a suit and tie. And President Biden said in his first press conference that these laws make Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle. So I was just wondering if our panelists believe that these characterizations are dramatic, or do they fit exactly what we're fighting?
I think they fit in a lot of ways. The county takeover applies to everybody, but we also have lots of provisions that are going to target people who are working multiple shifts. We had a great use of drop boxes in 2020 during COVID. In my county alone, we had 38. Under the new ordinance, we will get dropped down to 8 for the entire largest county in the state of Georgia. And they have to be inside a polling location only during early voting hours. And so they're essentially useless now. And that is definitely going to attack, voters of color, but also just all voters who work long shifts. They've dramatically shut down the absentee request time now. Now you have a cutoff of 11 days before. And so that is going to require a lot of education for folks. What else? There was, what am I forgetting, Marilyn?
Well, Shea, may I mention some follow up on that point that you made about the shortened period of time for absentee voting? Mm-hmm. I believe that in many cases, those who sponsored and voted for this bill were just trying to cut down on the number of people voting every place they could. They figured the more people that vote, the less chance they have of getting elected. But you know how almost every state has excuse-based, at least, absentee voting. If you're ill, if you get called up on military duty, if you have jury duty, you can at least get an absentee ballot. All that is now gone in Georgia. If in the last 11 days you were to get sick or quarantined or get called away, you cannot get a ballot. It's just pure disenfranchisement if 11 days before the election something unforeseen happens. I don't know of any other state that has such a stringent and mean-spirited type of absentee ballot policy.
Well, and our provisional ballot, our out of precinct provisional ballot is also a big one. Now if you vote outside of your precinct, it used to be that they would let you vote a provisional ballot and at least the federal and statewide races would count, but your local ones wouldn't. They're just saying that it doesn't count now. And so we know that that's going to impact, people that, well, frankly, I think it's wrong because they sent out the wrong precinct cards just in 2020. And so it might not even be someone's fault that they show up to the wrong precinct. And if they're working late and getting there 5 minutes before the polls close, they're not going to have time to get to another poll. So that's a big one. I know y'all heard on the news all about the criminalizing handing out water. That was just silly. And then another big one is they've made it a felony to intentionally look at someone else's ballot. And I don't know what Texas's, are y'all on the Dominion BMD ballot marking devices? Okay. So our new machines they stand straight up. They can't be laid down. They are bright lit and they are so big that our polling locations, it's hard to position them in such a way. I mean, I stood outside of one of my polling locations, 50 feet outside the open doors and 50 feet inside the doors. They were facing the doors. I knew who people were voting for. It was crazy. And so Matt, we already know poll workers who understand these issues very well, who have said, I'm not going to risk a felony because I've already been called out because I'm considered kind of a troublemaker. They've already filed state election board violations against me. I'm not going to risk a felony. Imagine people of color right now in the climate with law enforcement, how intimidating that's going to be for them to, when they realize that they could be held liable for a felony. I think this is ripe for all kinds of intimidation, and it's just wrong. So
It is,
that is
sorry.
definitely Jim Crow 2.0 right there.
And when she says intentionally looking, of course, from 5, 10, or 50 feet away, nobody knows what it is you're looking at. So it's very easy to be accused of looking at something when you're really just glancing into the room.
Yeah.
And so for us in Texas, like, it's like, don't just agree with Stacey Abrams and President Biden. Like, we have definitely been using the Jim Crow 2.0 to talk about the bills that are actually going to be on the House floor tomorrow. So when I get done here, we're still working on helping with amendments and floor questions. But it is very clear in Texas, if you just kind of like zoom out and look at all of what Texas Republicans are doing, from gerrymandering to the voter suppression bills, it only makes sense if you think about it in terms of they are just petrified of the communities of color who will soon be the dominant force in Texas politics. And they're doing everything they can to make sure that those communities, even if they demographically become the majority, that those numbers aren't reflected in the voting rolls. You know, if you can just freeze the voting rolls so they look the same today, 5 years from now, you've effectively kept them from exercising their political power. And the way they're trying to do it in Texas, what we're going to see in the bill that just heard tomorrow, they're doing things like they're trying to empower partisan poll watchers so that they can videotape people inside the polls if they're receiving assistance. They will prevent the presiding judges from being able to kick a poll watcher out of the poll site if they're being disruptive, except under some very limited set of circumstances. And this is really important because we released a video a couple weeks ago that we got our hands on from the Harris County Republican Party, where they just flat out said it. There was in the presentation where the guy speaking is talking about their poll watching program and how they want to recruit this election integrity brigade of 10,000 people. And he points to the wider sort of suburbs of Houston and says, we're trying to get some people from up over here and send them down here. And then he points to the Black and brown communities and sort of the core of Houston. And he says they need people to have the courage to go down into these communities so that they can cap the quote unquote voter fraud. I mean, the number of dog whistles within sort of what we saw there was amazing. Like, it is very clear what the intentions are and what they are trying to do here. It has Jim Crow written all over it.
Yep.
That unfortunately is just like the beginning of sort of the terrible things that are in that bill, but definitely Jim Crow 2.0 down here.
Well, good luck fighting it.
Yeah.
So to expand on Jim Crow 2.0 a bit more, and Bill SB 202, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp recently passed SB 202, which gives state level officials the authority to take the powers of county election boards, allowing the Republican dominated state government to potentially disqualify voters in Democratic leaning areas. So our HR 1 for the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act viable solution to the damage of SB 202 if they could get past a filibuster?
So I think that they will help, but again, that's going to apply to federal and state elections. And so there may be things that will assist, but it is not a solution for this county takeover provision, I do not believe.
I agree. This is just such an unimaginable type of process in our democracy that a state would come in and take over bipartisan election boards, that the federal legislation didn't contemplate anything like that. And I think it would actually be very hard to get into federal legislation. So we're going to have to fight this at the state level and fight it hard.
Mm-hmm. But of course, we want those bills to pass.
Yeah.
We need all the help we can get in Georgia and other areas. So yes, we are advocating strongly for them, but it's just, this is a creative, new assault on our democracy that we're just trying to wrap our brains around it and figure out what to do.
You mentioned the poll watcher efforts that they are trying to ramp up in Texas. The power of the poll watcher. It's kind of interesting, something that they're doing in Georgia that's a bit the opposite, and that is for mail ballot monitors. They are gagging us. They are saying that we cannot report problems, that we can only tell what I call the perpetrator. We can only tell an official. We cannot report it to the party who appointed us, the campaign, or the press. That if the press is in watching mail balloting, if they see a discrepancy, they are not to say anything. That's probably not going to survive a challenge, but anyway, okay. it's kind of the other side of the coin that you all are dealing with.
Oh, the other one that's really scary is the pre-election challenges that's been made. You've always been able to challenge whether or not a voter prior to the election was eligible to vote. And they did bring some of those in Georgia. They failed, but now it's really putting the burden back on the voter to come in and kind of defend themselves that they have a right to vote. They've added an extra step. And that to me is really dangerous too. And there's no limit on the number of voters they can challenge. So.
And again, if that were done in a state takeover situation where you've got one partisan appointee, what now is done in public, a challenge to a voter would be discussed in public. All of a sudden, this goes behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Right. And for our next question, for laws that restrict votes in both Texas and Georgia, do you believe that public outrage will be enough to fuel voter turnout and possibly remedy these damages?
I would say in Texas, no, I do not think so. That is my opinion. That I just think that we've already in Texas. So everybody thought we had this record turnout because 11 million people voted in November, but we have 17 million registered people. And if we had voted at the same percentage as Colorado, which is a kind of a positive voter access state, we would have had 14.4 million people. Wow. So we already are down 3.3 million people before you even do all these bills. So I feel, we've already got obstacles. And so now we're adding new obstacles. And some of these obstacles, in my opinion, and some of the bills that are there, we don't know, because some of this is coming up tomorrow and over the next few weeks, we don't really know what's going to be passed, but some of them are very hard to get over. I mean, I spent a lot of time registering voters out at a community college where there's a lot of disabled students, and they are roaming around in their wheelchairs because that community college is on a dart line. I'm just gonna, the way we've structured the vote by mail system now for disabled people, it will be very hard for those people to vote. I can't even imagine how they're going to vote, given what I know about these bills in terms of not being able to, they don't have printers to download applications. Now you can't send an application to them. We can't help them with an application. I mean, there's so many obstacles in the vote by mail system that it's very hard for me to imagine in Texas how energized people overcomes this. But
isn't that going to impact their voters too, though?
Yes.
That seems short-sighted, and I think there's some in Georgia too. So I'm going to give a more positive spin in Georgia because I try to be, my husband calls me the bluebird of happiness. And I believe that we have some good grounds to say this on because Georgia just turned blue. We were the center of the political universe. We elected Joe Biden and we elected John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock and changed the Senate as well. Our people on the ground are mobilized. They're still angry. They're still motivated. We've just got a huge education that we've got to do. And then hopefully some of these lawsuits and some efforts with some somewhat reasonable Republicans to try and clean up little pieces of it that might help. I mean, we're trying at all angles, but I'm going to stay positive. I want Stacey Abrams to be my next governor. I want Jen Jordan to be my next state attorney general. And so we have some amazing Democratic statewide candidates. And I am ready to make sure that we all get elected. So
I think that there was no doubt that the voter outrage about the bills that were initially introduced and all of the protest helped cut them back. Now they were cut back to horrible. I mean, but believe it or not, they were way worse. And the people speaking up did help. It helped a lot. Yeah.
They were trying to take away no excuse absentee voting. And so that did not get taken away. So that was a huge, huge effort. And we still can send out applications. We just have to put this big old font at the bottom of who we are sending them out. It's crazy anyway, but it sounds like you guys are in a lot worse. You started out in a worse situation and they're going the wrong direction for you. I hate that.
Yeah. And some of the things that are out in there right now haven't fully passed. They have, we've got another month or so, but some things may pass tomorrow or get pretty far along tomorrow because tomorrow's a big day. So Anthony may have a different opinion compared to my negativity. I don't know.
not that much different. No, not really. I think coming from a campaign background before I came to work on the nonprofit side, the nonpartisan side, I think polls, like, voters don't vote based on voting rights. Like, that's just not, if you see a ranking of like what issues people care about, healthcare, the economy, like voting rights is always pretty low at the bottom. So I don't know that you would really see like public outcry at the polls, but I think, what friends in Georgia were talking about, like where it is really important is right now where we're at in the legislative process. We saw in the last legislative session a similar bill trying to get passed, and we just were showing up and raising hell, and the legislators and advocacy groups and everybody, and that bill failed. It failed like right around the point where we are in the legislative process now. So there's still that little bit of clinging to optimism that maybe we can do something to either stop this one or at the very least get some of the worst provisions of it knocked off.
Can I ask a question about your, I'm just curious, what is your Republican Party legislative members doing? We had this weird thing where their base was calling for all of these, or the most extreme base was calling for all of these bills, but some of them were admitting behind closed doors they knew there was no widespread fraud and the election was legitimate, but they had to give their base something. I'm just curious, are you having that similar? We have a lot of eating their own within the Republican Party going on, which I would be fine if they just, destroyed themselves, but I don't think it's going to happen.
No, I think the Republican Party in Texas has done a pretty good job of cleansing itself of any of the kind of more moderate Republicans that we once saw there. So most of the ones you see are, I saw there was like a Trump Election Integrity Alliance thing announced today. And one of the co-chairs is Ken Paxton, who is our Attorney General out in Texas. He was one of the guys that was suing other states trying to overturn the election. Like, he's a pretty good representation of your typical Texas Republican.
Okay. Awesome.
I'm sorry. I should say that there's a few. There have been a handful who have spoken out, who realized, I think, that like, oh, wait a second, if we do all these things to vote by mail, we're actually screwing ourselves. And so there have been a handful who have spoken out in kind of a little bit of a common sense, even though probably also self-preservation type of way.
Yeah. It does seem like your business community is beginning to get a bit organized and raise their voices. I believe, and Representative Roberts may disagree with this, but I believe that if the business community had come in earlier in Georgia, that we would not have seen this law be as severe as it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a little worried that our business community is a little late in this process right now, because there was a letter yesterday There's some letters that came from a Houston coalition, and there was a letter from 50 businesses that was published yesterday. But it's feeling a little late in the process to me. I don't know, maybe it'll have some impact.
Yeah, I think it actually is having an impact. I do wish more of them would specifically call out the bills and not just say like a sort of platitude about voting rights in general. But our lieutenant governor just went apoplectic, just lost his mind during a press conference the first time. I think it was like Southwest Airlines came out, and that says to me that okay, this is good. We need to keep doing this. So if he's really mad about this, that's the key. Let's keep doing more of that. So hopefully we see more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's other things in our bills that they're really, scary for people that work the polls and are used to, so many election workers take such pride in, being there and making sure the process works. And one of the big pieces running through all these bills is a lot of criminalizing election, clerk behavior. And anyone that's worked an election knows that, you work in teams and, you're checking data all the way through, and do my ballots match the paper ballots match what's on in the machine, and just you're constantly checking all the different things. And it's this thought that this whole process, what people work so hard on, that anybody could just sort of say, hey, I kind of think that what you just did was a crime, and your things are being made a felony. The things are being the same as if I was a burglar, it's just they're making election clerks and judges behavior criminal in many cases. So there's a lot of things that we have. There's a whole bunch of things going on with how you can assist people with language differences and disabilities, and that's one that also sort of hurts my heart, because I've helped so many people at the polls. Sometimes people come into the polls by themselves and they ask an election clerk to help them, and that process is getting more complicated. And people that come in and try to help, it just really feels like it's going to slow everybody down and make people feel less welcome. They're just not going to feel welcome to vote.
Okay, so with all the restrictions, I think that the big question may be here for everyone that's tuned in is, what can we do as everyday citizens to be more prepared for when the elections come around, whether that's making sure our elderly family members have their ID, making sure we bring snacks in line, if that's not illegal to bring them yourselves. I think there's so many questions still surrounding it, but what sorts of tips do you all have for us to be prepared for when the time comes?
I would say vote early, whether it's absentee or in-person voting. Do not waste your chance. Get there as early as possible so that you have time to educate yourself. I mean, I'm confident that Fair Fight, we're so blessed to have Stacy in our state. I know she's in other states, but Fair Fight and ACLU, and so many of these groups, Common Cause, will be blasting out the deadlines and the dates and the times and all of that. But just really make sure you know where you're going, and then anything you can do to spread the information, the corrected information to your friends and family. To me, that is going to be the key in showing them that we won't be stopped, right? That we will get there and we will get our vote cast. And I do believe, I know voting rights may not be on the top of people, like when you poll, but for Georgia, we're coming off of wins that we're very proud of. And so it is about voting rights, but it's also about not letting them take that progress away from us when it's so blatantly obvious that we are blue. Our state legislature just doesn't look like it. Some of our city councils don't look like it, but we are coming for all the seats. So
I would say that in Georgia in particular, the rules are changing so much on absentee voting that what people could do is help make very organized efforts to help elderly vote. Many people who are not going to have a printer, not going to have all the equipment they need, they're not going to understand that while they've always waited to go get their absentee ballot, that they can't anymore. And they won't be necessarily attuned to the changes. So I think some real organized, small community efforts around helping elderly and those people who may not be noticing the changes would be a great payoff.
Yeah, I would just add that since we're at in a spot in Texas where the bills haven't passed, I would just ask anyone out there that is either in Texas or near Texas or has a friend in Texas to please go ahead and weigh in the next 2 weeks and call something like the House Elections Committee. There's 9 people on that committee, and everyone I know is calling them and saying, hey, these bills are not fair and they're reducing voter access. And the Lee LWV Texas website has got a whole thing where it says take action, and it helps you go through and you can send emails to all it populates with all the committee members. And so if you are willing to help stop some of our voter laws for the next few weeks, we still could use help down here.
All right, for the next part of the panel, we're going to move to asking individual questions to our panelists. I'd like to begin with Marilyn Marks. So how do you believe that some aspects of law of Senate Bill 202 will affect and impact the work that you guys do at the Coalition for Good Governance? And do you think that 2022 will be harder than 2020?
For our small organization, it probably will be. We already had a massive lawsuit that has been going on since 2017 to have the voting equipment that Georgia is using declared unconstitutional. And that was already taking an enormous amount of our work. Well, now SB 202 has come on top of it and is taking, for me, 18 hours a day as it is. And we've publicly announced we will be filing a lawsuit about SB 202 on top of what we've already got going. And so it will be busier for us. What we are doing will be attacking different portions of the SB 202 than the 6 lawsuits that have already been filed. This is such a monster, and I'm expecting you guys in Texas are going to be having to face the same things that, and this is such a monstrous bill. We say no one lawsuit is going to kill it. It's going to take death by 1,000 cuts. Mm-hmm. And so we will spend our 2021 and 2022 trying to take our share of those cuts at it.
Great, thank you. Danielle, would you like to take over with the next guest?
Sure. So, Ms. Larkin, let's talk a little bit about the new legislation happening in Texas. So, Senate Bill 7, or SB 7, has been backed by Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. The bill will create restrictions on mail-in ballots, voter qualifications, and many more. Could you describe any other consequences resulting from SB 7, either directly or indirectly affecting constituents? Would HB 6 also have any consequences?
Right. So most of the things that Anthony and I have been talking about are in HB 6 and SB 7, and those 2 bills are probably going to get combined into a big omnibus bill at some point. But the things that we've been talking about, the fact that poll watchers are given more authority, for example, Anthony mentioned that. And poll watchers is a role that most people don't understand because there's clerks and judges that go through a lot of training in Texas, but poll watchers typically don't have a lot of training. Most of them don't really understand how the process works. Some maybe do, but a lot don't. And there's a lot of different organizations that try to, hire poll watchers and ask them to go to the polls. And so we've got this situation in Texas that I think might, if that comes to be where poll watchers have a lot of authority and they can say, hey, I see you doing something that doesn't look right, so I'm going to go ahead and they're supposed to be allowed to video you, and then they can mail or send the video off to the Secretary of State of a voter or an election clerk or judge doing something they think is wrong. That whole concept, I think, is going to create some chaos in the polls. I think voters feel very private about their vote, and they really don't want poll watchers in there videoing them. I think that that's going to cause some problems. So there's this whole thing with the poll watchers having a lot more authority than they used to is a big part of both bills. The fact that we mentioned that election clerks and judges, that a lot of if they make a mistake, it's possible they will be accused of some criminal behavior. The whole vote by mail system, the access to vote by mail ballots is getting much harder in these bills. And we already have a pretty difficult vote by mail system here. We have, you have to have certain criteria to get a vote by mail ballot, but it's getting harder to actually physically get it. And then this whole thing with folks with disabilities are going to have a harder time voting. Those are the big ones in my mind, but I think there's a lot of smaller bills that also have some things that I feel are obstacles. So there's a lot of obstacles in the bills. Did I answer that question?
Yes.
Sort of.
You did great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Representative Shea Roberts, you sort of get a front row seat to these bills in Georgia that affect your constituents' lives and voting freedoms. So what can you do? And similarly, what can your constituents do and regular citizens do as Democrats or as voters to help combat this voter suppression?
Well, I did get a front row seat, and I will say my first session was I knew it was going to be bad, but it was eye-opening for sure. You know, what I did, because this was such a passion of mine already, was I made myself a resource to my caucus, to the committee members. I worked with our lawyers and Fair Fights lawyers, and any chance I could get to help behind the scenes. I wasn't looking for any credit for it. I just wanted to be keeping up on the issues the whole time. Now that we're past it, I'm making efforts to try and see if we can't clean some of it up. I know they're not going to change the whole thing. I'm a resource on some of the lawsuits, and then I'm also, I was just invited to be a Fair Fight Fellow, where I will hopefully be getting education from some of the best as well on additional issues. So I look forward to all of that, and I will continue fighting hard on these issues for all voters in Georgia. As far as people in the public, we just have to stay vigilant. We have to stay educated. We have to do our homework. And we just have to figure out the best way that we can have our voice heard and our vote cast within these new parameters. And it can be done. It's not easier for sure, but it can be done. And so that's what I would say.
I have a follow-up question for Representative Roberts. So right now in Georgia, it's off season. You guys, adjourned. You won't be back in session really for your real session until January. Does it help for us to contact you now? I say you, I'm talking about the lawmakers. Is it helpful to contact in the quiet time, or do we need to save our fire?
I don't know that you're going to have people keep their energy up all the way like from now through January, but I do think there needs to be steady pressure on with these issues, and continuing to put pressure on the Republicans to know that these laws are not going to stand, these undemocratic laws. So I definitely think the pressure needs to stay on, and then I think we need to graduate it as we get closer to January.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Now, Mr. Gutierrez, I also wanted to expound a bit on voters' rights with this next question for you. Your organization, Common Cause, is helping to advance the adoption of automatic voter registration. Can you discuss what AVR is and if there have been any unique challenges in initiating it nationwide?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, we haven't been doing a ton of work on that in Texas because it's Texas, where, for us, that's like some pie in the sky sci-fi concept of automatic registration. Like, we're one of the only states that still doesn't have online voter registration. But for people that don't know what it is, automatic voter registration, there's kind of different ways you can do it. But basically what it is like anytime you interact with a government agency, like you go to renew your driver's license or like Medicare sort of processes things, you will be opted in to register to vote, or you can be offered to like opt out of it. So places that have implemented it, you see pretty significant increases in the amount of voter registration, the amount of people being registered. There are several of these bills in Texas. 0 of them have gotten a hearing in the past couple legislative sessions, but it's definitely something people are pushing. I think, to the extent you see any opposition to it, it's like one of two things. It's like either Republicans who realize it's going to increase the number of people in the voter rolls and they don't like that. But for people that have like legitimate just sort of policy concerns, there have been some concerns in places like Texas, where there are large immigrant communities, that you could accidentally get someone on the voter rolls who is not a citizen, and then they will have basically committed a crime by trying to register to vote, and not understanding like how the opt-out system works. And off the top of my head, I do not recall. Like, I think I had this discussion about, I think in Illinois they have this system set up and sort of had to work through those concerns and figured out some smart processes. I know one bill that we were talking about in Texas, that we're hoping to do maybe next session, would focus on doing automatic registration only for naturalization ceremonies. So people who that they 100% like these are citizens. And for any of us who've ever done voter registration at a naturalization ceremony, like these are people that just like, they lose their mind. They're just so excited to register to vote when they come out of the ceremony and there's the legal women voter table there. They get to like go fill out the card. So hopefully that is a bill that everyone will be able to get on board with, but we shall see.
I will say y'all are making me feel even more positive. We have automatic registration, so.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gutierrez, and as well as all of our panelists. That's all the time we have for today. I thank you guys so much for joining us. I believe I speak on behalf of our audience and KISA Public Radio staff when I say we immensely appreciate you guys taking time out to educate us on this topic. And I hope that you in the audience have learned about more ways that you can get involved in this current battle, what exactly we're facing. And I hope you all have a great night. Thank you so much again. And yeah, have a great night.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course, yeah.
Thanks.